Yeah, so let's continue with the second talk. That is also interesting topic, but a little bit less technology driven. It's more like interesting for software developers in general. It's how to become more productive. 7 principles that will boost your developer productivity. So I'm going to talk about generally applicable principles, how to become more productive as a developer, and ultimately how to make your work also a little bit more enjoyable. So I'm still the same person, Sebastian, but well, what is not on this slide, important information that enables me to give this talk, I'm German, right? This is what we're known for. We German are supposed to be efficient. Fun facts about Germany, there ain't no fun in Germany. Get back to work. Yes, okay. So we're gonna be efficient and trying to be more productive as developers, and we have a look at a few, well, generally applicable principles. And one of the most important principles, I believe, is we should use automation, right? Whenever you find something that you can automate, try to do so. Try to embrace automation, because this is the way, I believe, how we should use computers in the correct way, right? Computers are not very smart, right? They can do only very stupid things, but they can do these stupid things very fast and very reliably, right? This is something that we humans are not good at, right? Humans get bored, humans make erroneous mistakes, humans get angry, I don't know. Humans are much better at thinking, doing creative type of work, solving complex problems, right? So we should use automation. We should use the computer in a correct way, in a smart way, and automate things. And there are many ways of automation. Big automation, you know, like big type of scripts or processes that you can automate, and even all kinds of small type of automation. And especially the latter is what I want to show you. And especially that means whenever you find shortcuts, you should use them, especially application shortcuts, right? If you use your IDE, if you use some other program as a developer in a more sophisticated way, there's probably a faster way to do a certain action. Keyboard shortcuts is one example, right? So what I want to show you first is, well, one program where we should spend a lot of time in, that is our IDE. I use IntelliJ. You can use, whatever you like, but I highly advise you to use IntelliJ. I'm a big fan of that. And there are many ways how to do automation. For example, if you have a Hello World class, so this is now Java, but it's really not about Java. It's more about principles. So for example, if you say you write a main method, okay, what was that? Did you see what I did? Right, instead of typing public static void main, right? String, and if I don't do any typo mistakes, then I can type this myself, right? Or I can say, oh, actually there is a faster version around. There's a shortcut to, for example, create this. So another shortcut for system out, let's say, okay, for example, I want to create something here, do this and do that, and let's say do something else. In order to have any other development action, there's probably a shortcut or a shorter way for it, right? Assuming we want to code something for do this, do that, do something else, and now we want to refactor, right? This is too much for this method. Let's say, okay, we want to take this, copy, paste this into a private static method, right? Void do this and that, and then copy, paste this into this. Okay. And then, of course, I forgot to call the method. Oops. Right? So a lot of things can go wrong if I do this manually. Now, I refactored this into a method, but there is an easier way. For example, if I say, okay, take these 2 lines of code, and now right-click, refactor, extract, method, and use this feature. Do this and that, and then IntelliJ will extract this into a method and not forget to call the method here as well, right? So instead of all the mistakes that it can do when copy-pasting code around, there is an easier way to do it. And then, once you did that for the 10th time, at some point you get lazy of right-click, refactor, extract method, and you will see, oh, actually there's a shorter way, Control-Alt-M, do this and that, and then you're done, right? Or Control-Alt-N to inline it, and again, right? So whatever you do, there is probably a faster way around, especially if you're coding right now. And then, for example, you can outsource both methods. And then IntelliJ is smart enough to tell you, oh, by the way, if you would change your signature, then actually you can get rid of one. Well, no. So this is just one version on one way of using some kind of shortcuts, right? It's one way of automating, because the computer is doing stuff for you that is just boring work, right? The creative part of work is to see, okay, what should we refactor here, right? But executing it in a straightforward way, well, there's probably a faster way around to do that, right? So that is one way of automation. So whenever you find a feature for your IDE, and there are tons of refactoring features, especially in IntelliJ, you could just get used to it, see, okay, what other features are there, and then gradually improve your horizon and widen your knowledge of what features you can use. So try to become a power user, especially of the IDE. A few other features. What I really like in IntelliJ that works in all IDEs in IntelliJ is called live templates. That is how I created my public static void method. For example, if you use, well, doesn't matter, any framework, you typically type some kind of boilerplate code, right? I use a lot of Java Enterprise, so I typically have a lot of @inject. So what you probably saw, I don't have to type @inject and select the correct import. No, I type something faster, IJT, tap, and then it injects, something like some bean here, right? So that is just some way of automating. Or @inject an event, right? So the point is having the correct injection already, then you don't get into some erroneous mistakes. So I defined these imports or these live templates. You can do the same for whatever you use. If you use Spring, well, you can define one for AutoWide, or for all these things that you keep typing all over again, right? Or I don't know how many times I typed @persistent context entity manager if you use JPA, or managed executor service, right? @resource and things like that. What you just keep typing all over again. I don't know, post-construct method, pre-destroy method, test, and things like that. There are just some shortcuts to make your life a little bit easier, right? Again, for whatever technology you're using. If you remember the Kubernetes example that I showed you before, I was talking about some Kubernetes resources, right, with these YAML files that you have to write yourself. That is quite some effort. Or, I don't know, I asked before who used Kubernetes before, right? I don't know, who of you can remember the structure of a Kubernetes deployment out of your head? I can't. So instead of copy-pasting that from somewhere, you can just define a live template, including some variables, what you saw here, and then you have that structure already being into place. I do the same with POM.xml. So instead of looking up so this, for example, that is the old dependency of Java EE, and instead of looking up what, I don't know, the Jakarta EE dependency is, I just have a live template and it shows me the current version. And it's just easier to use. And again, that is some form of automation. So wherever you find some shortcuts or some faster ways to do things, you should do that. Become a power user of whatever tool you're using, typically IDE as a developer, right? Then, also a good topic, what I'm a huge fan of, especially if you use a Unix-based operating system friend as developer, right? So why I'm a big fan of the command line is, well, first of all, you can type on a keyboard. You don't have to use a mouse, but more to that later. And especially if you are in a Unix environment, you can do anything what the computer could do using the command line, right? So let's go a little bit into the command line. Don't be afraid of that. This is my command line in Linux. Who of you uses bash? Hands up. Bash, yeah. Who of you uses a different shell, like I, for example, use Z shell? Okay, I don't want to be too religious about that, but if you use bash, I advise you to have a look into Z shell. Why? Well, because of many features, many reasons, but mostly because of two features that make you, want to never go back. First of all, if you're in the command line, you typically change directories by typing cd. In Z shell, we can change directories without typing cd. Well, it sounds like a small improvement, but trust me, once you can say, go into /temp/test project, hit enter, and then you are in that directory, and then you never want to type cd again because it's just extra effort. The second reason, which is much bigger even, is you can auto-expand multiple directory hierarchies by hitting tab once if whatever you write matches. So instead of saying, okay, go to home workspaces, Sebastian Daschner, tab, right? So I type something, tab, auto-expand, tab, auto-expand. That was the project before, tab, source tab, main tab, Java tab, right? What I do instead is saying, okay, I go to workspaces, Sebastian Daschner, main, modern, source, main Java, hit tab once, and it auto-expands everything. I hit enter, and then I'm there. And once you get used to that, you never want to switch back. And actually, I use the command line, believe it or not, for everything. I don't even use a file explorer anymore. I use, move and copy to move my way around, and that's just much faster. Especially if, well, you can combine it with, again, some shortcuts. So if I say, okay, use, I don't know, Control L, you probably know this, to do the clear. So once you have some commands typed, Command L to clear it. Again, it's just a shortcut to move a little bit faster. Or I use Control K to show the current directory, what is here in this project, or Control J to show that with a little bit more hierarchy or even more hierarchy. You can define shortcuts for that, and then it's even much better than a file explorer. You can actually move around faster because you can use the keyboard, right? It's just easier to use, I believe. Question? Yeah?
I have a question.
Sure.
Have you tried to measure the increasing performance of
productivity, how long it takes, or of the time?
Have you measured the performance, the increasing performance of a common programmer who use shortcuts or not to use?
I personally,
Everyday life.
right. I personally haven't. So I personally haven't measured, like two programmers sitting next to each other. This would actually be an interesting thing, not only for the time, I believe, but also we come to that for the mental energy required, right? Because once you can, well, use some shortcuts like I did in my IDE, for example, to say something like I can type @inject much easier, and I don't have to, @inject, oh, typo, retry it again, right? So it's also, I believe, more joyful to develop. But yeah, to answer your question, I have not tested it myself, but I believe it's just much faster to do. I mean, if you look at how fast you can write code, once you get used to it.
Okay.
So it's like a long-term investment that you do.
Okay, and what percentage of time did you
spend on improving it?
On typing code?
Right. I actually don't know how much so again, I don't have numbers of that. There's an interesting XKCD comic with like a table. When does it make sense to use automation? So in terms of, you can calculate it, how long does the task how long does the task take if you do it manually? And how much basically investment can I do in order to write some automation for it, or in order to learn some shortcut, right? And then you see how often you do the task, and then you have a table basically how fast does it monetize or accommodate that I automate in this case. So you can have a look at that. But to answer your question, I don't have some concrete numbers. Yes?
Any other shells? Maybe you've heard about fish shell?
I have not tried fish shell. I heard of a few other shells, and basically I like the default that comes with Z shell. That's why I advocate it. But yes, if you have some other shell that has a similar thing or that you're happy with, that's perfect. Or in general, a shell that you're happy with, then I'm happy, because it's just much faster than using your mouse and doing things. In a shell you can automate, you can do all kinds of cool things. For example, another thing that you should really use once you use the shell is aliases. Shell alias should be your biggest friend when you use the shell, because, again, automation. Who of you uses Maven? I asked before. Well, a lot of you, right? So you probably type this, Maven clean install, many times yourself, right? Or, oh God, Maven, you see, it's late. I already do a lot of typos. Maven clean package. Or actually, if we do, well, you do some longer commands sometimes, right? So why do you keep typing that yourself? How about what? Alias, yes. How about an alias? Good point. Why should I write maven clean install when I can just write this, or maven clean package, or maven integration test, what I wrote before, right? Or, if we're honest, actually we do something like this, right? Maven clean install and skip the test. So you can write an alias for it. Or I asked again before, who used Docker, right? So how many times did you write Docker PS, or Docker build, or Docker push? Or if you use Git on the command line, I'm again a big command line fan, so I use Git on the command line. How many times did you write Git status yourself, right? If you could just use an alias, like Git status, or Git commit, or Git push to the current branch, and so on and so forth. So there is typically, you know, a faster way to do things, and what you can just have a look at, all of the commands that you keep typing yourself. There's a very easy hack. If you have a look at your history file of your shell, look into that file, do a sort by usage, and sort it by, you know, the most often commands that you type yourself, and these are the first commands that you should define aliases for, and that, you know, makes you just much more productive. And now I defined over, I don't know, 200 or 300 aliases already, and I use them all the time because, you know, it's just so much faster, especially if you use the command line a lot. So aliases really are your friend. And then the obvious form of automation when it comes to the command line are, well, shell scripts or bash scripts, right? That is just very obvious and should be, you know, used easily. Why? Well, a bash script, how do you write it? Easy. You just write all of the commands that you would type in your command line into a file, make it executable, done. And there goes your automation, right? So what I typed before with in the first session with maven clean package, Docker build, Docker run, Docker push, Docker I don't know, write a shell script for it, and then you have a very simple CI server, right? You just automate that pipeline and execute it one after another. And then you can make that automation more sophisticated, and that will just make you so much faster. That is true for every process that you do manually, especially if you're in a Unix environment, right? There's almost anything that you can automate using that way, right? How do you deploy to your local development environment, right? To this, I don't know, application server or whatever. So build your WAR file and copy paste it somewhere and then restart the service or whatever you do. You can automate that. Whatever you do, it's regardless of the technology, there's some automation for it. So for more automation, it's basically what we do. We write something as code, right? So instead of having just code as code, obviously, right? That is already automation. How is your business logic implemented? Or configuration as code, right? If you have some XML files or things like that. Also a good way to solve things. Why? We automate the build, for example. Or infrastructure as code. The Docker file that you saw before, or the Kubernetes YAMLs, it's the same thing. We write as code how the target state, the desired state looks like, and then some automation can execute it for us, right? We don't have to do it ourselves. And, well, you can basically have everything as code. Documentation can be code. There are plain text documentation formats, such as ASCII doc or Markdown, that you can write into, and that you can further process into a fancy PDF or a website if you want. Or, you know, all kinds of installation. When I bought this laptop, the installation of all my programs and stuff that I have took like 15 minutes because I can automate everything on Linux, right? So I say apt-get, or in this case I use Arch Linux, install this and that, all of these applications, you know, and then set up my configuration, set up my dot files, grab them from a Git repository, and you can basically automate everything there, have everything as code, store it under version control, and once you get a new laptop, you say install, enter, and then you can go away, you can take your coffee, because it's automated. You don't have to do it yourself, yes?
Have you had any experience restoring Linux after recursive change mode?
After recursive what? Changes?
Change mode, yeah. For example, change mode from sudo -r.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that is an issue if you have, right, if you have configuration, whether it's idempotent or not. I mean, you could do that into a script as well, and then check for, you can make that very sophisticated and check whether the module has already been added and things like that. But
I mean, have you had an experience trying to restore default settings?
Yeah, I mean, it depends which commands you are calling, like your package manager or something like that, right? So that would just in general would mean your script should be idempotent, if you check for some previous state.
You get called to the Earth directory, change
Right.
the owner of the files, and basically like destroys the security settings.
Yeah, you have to. I know what you mean. You have to be very careful what you do. With which directory. So always, try to properly change the directory first, that you're in the correct way. Yes, that's very true. So it requires a little bit of, it will go wrong 20 times, but once you get it right, then it will save some time. All right, one important principle to follow, or what is helpful, 3-strike principle. So if you do some manual work, well, the first time it's a little bit annoying that you have to do some manual work, what the computer can do, but it's fine. If you do some process, writing some commands for the second time, then you get a little bit more annoyed, but that's still okay. And then the third time you said, "Niet." Then you don't want to do it. Then you actually say you write some automation to then do whatever the computer should do. And then the 4th time, 5th time, 6th time, you save some time. It makes sense. When it comes to programming, especially when it comes to tests, you also should write tests, of course, in an automated way, that they not only run and execute in an automated way, but also that they verify in an automated way. So you as a human, you should not be required to look at your code or at your results and say, okay, yeah, this looks about right. This can be verified in an automated way. And whatever you're developing, if you do enterprise applications, then it's quite easy. But even if you do front end, or if you do, I don't know, some video processing, PDF generation, you can automate almost everything. You can, record some videos and then compare them in an automated way to let the computer decide whether your test result is valid or not. You can be creative, actually, by just writing some automation. And if you take that further, we end up, well, a continuous delivery, right? How do we roll out our application in a sophisticated way using a well-defined process? Well, we build up, it's called continuous delivery, because it's automation per se, right? If you do that 100 times, or I don't know how many times a day, it just makes sense to have some automation for it, right? And that is actually much more reliable and much better and much faster than a human could possibly do that. Okay, then second principle that we want to focus on, literally, is to focus and to eliminate context switches. Why? We know that processors, CPUs, have quite a penalty to pay if we context switch multiple processes, right? If you have a process that runs on a CPU, and then you have a penalty to basically clear the execution pipeline, if you know about how processes work, and that's bad. Humans, however, have also a context switch penalty that is actually much higher. So if we switch the context from doing this to doing that, it requires some mental energy, and it actually requires time until you build up the same level of productivity that you had before, because you have to clean your temporary storage in your brain. And there are many context switches, again, big ones like a colleague coming in, or small ones like even hand and mouse movements that you can do. So very important, if you want to be productive, take your mouse, if you have one, and throw it away. Don't ever look at it again. Why? You are developers. You should use the keyboard. So the keyboard should be your friend, and you should spend as much time as possible on your keyboard. Why? Well, you're much more productive if you can use the keyboard to do a certain job. Why? We are developers, and ultimately we write some code, so we spend some time on the keyboard anyway, and you want to, well, get rid of all of these context switches that you do. So I'll talk about a little bit more of that in a second, but now, just connected to that, if you use your keyboard, you might want to consider to get a proper one, right? A proper keyboard, why? Well, we spend a lot of time on that. And I don't want to do any advertising for some keyboards here. This is just what I used before, Das Keyboard. It sounds German, but it's actually a US brand of mechanical keyboard. They're using cherry switches. If you like your coworkers, you get cherry brown ones, not the blue ones, because they're very clicky and loud, right? Proper keyboard switches. Or actually what I use right now is this one, Real Force, Japanese brand, Topper switches, which are like capacitive switches, work similar to your phone screen. But anyway, the point is, if you spend a lot of time in front of a keyboard typing things the whole day, it makes a huge difference whether you get a proper device or not, right? So I always compare it with you know, a craft worker, like a carpenter, who would also not go to the next do-it-yourself store to buy the cheapest tools, right? If it's a profession, if it's a professional job, you get some professional, proper tools, right? Because you spend a lot of time typing, for example. Question?
What do you think about like ergonomic keyboards like Microsoft is offering?
Right. If they have proper keys, proper switches internally, then this makes a lot of sense. But in general, I mean, it's up to you. Just try out what works for you, but typically spend a little bit of money to invest, you know, in a proper device. So if that works much better than, you know, a cheapest, I don't know, the model that came with your computer, then it's already a win if that works for you, right? But that is very much taste. Yeah.
I don't use a mouse, but I
Very good.
to click. It's an example. To click on some hyperlink in the browser.
Yeah. What you can do.
Could you show me?
Yes. You see this? This is a browser feature. If I hit F and then I say features, then you hit another key and you can actually use your browser with the keyboard. I don't use this all the time. Sometimes I do use the mouse, but while you are in this mode of just going around, okay, the Wi-Fi is slow. I think it's called Vim. You see, you know, I can do this and I can use the Vim movements to move around here, move up and down. And you know, of course, change tabs and things like that using the keyboard. It's basically keyboard shortcuts for your browser.
Click a link at the
Yes, I click link, and then it shows an overlay of basically where you want to type or touch in your browser. I can show you some links later on if you're interested in that. But
What about sound of that mechanical keyboard? So is it noisy?
it depends which keyboard you use. So if you, this Topper one, no, this is actually much quieter than the cherry switches. The cherry brown ones are quite okay. I think the cherry blue ones are a little bit annoying because they're clicky like a mouse, you know, click, click, click. Yeah, I know. I was there before. Once I had one of these using the cherry blue ones, and the next day, you know, the colleagues like threw out my keyboard and said I have to get the old one back because it was too loud. I know. Headphones or you know, headset work, but anyway, another thing when it comes, oh God, please load the website. When it comes to keyboards, is you probably, whoever uses a non-US keyboard layout, I guess all of you. I actually have not looked at the Ukrainian, or do you use the Russian keyboard layout, or is it special for Ukrainian? Special one with the I and the I with two dots that you don't have in the Russian Cyrillic. Yes, I know about that. I don't know how you can type special characters. So if you use a keyboard, I highly advise you to have a look at the US International Keyboard layout with no alt graphics and no dead keys. Why? I'm from Germany originally, and the German keyboard layout is not very well suited for Java developers. Why? I don't know if you haven't seen that, and I don't know where that is on the Ukrainian keyboard, but if you want to type the curly braces for the German one, you have to type Alt plus 7 and 8. You know, it's a very weird hand movement in order to get some curly braces, like these, right? And the same is true for all kinds of special characters. So what I use is the US keyboard layout, where you get all the special characters, you know, like forward slashes, backslashes, curly braces. And if you say, oh, by the way, I want to type, you know, some umlauts or stuff like that, well, you can do that by the alt graphics of the international keyboard layout by typing these characters as well. And then for at least Western Europe, you can type, you know, all the characters. And for any other thing, well, I even you don't know how hard that is if you never learned how to type on a, you know, Cyrillic keyboard. You can do that as well by switching your keyboard using a shortcut, and then, you know, you're just much faster while developing. So So I try to have a look at it. Why? Because you're a developer and you probably need some special characters that are easily reachable. It takes about 1 or 2 weeks to get used to different keyboard. I mean, that was the case for me, but you might have a look at that. So that's about, you know, to be said about keyboard usage. Another thing that is, yes, please.
Quick question, what distro of Linux you prefer?
What distro of Linux? I'll talk a little bit about that. I use Arch Linux. I mean, actually, I don't care much about the distro. It's more about the window manager, but I'll explain a little bit more in a second. Yes?
Have you tried to use Mac board? Because there are types of some American and European.
Yes.
European has different.
Yes, I use the American one, the US keyboard, actually even with the US keys, so I have US hardware, so you see the enter key is different. I like this more because that key is easily reachable and not like here and there, so you can, it's just a matter of preference. So, I mean, whatever you prefer, the only thing is you should get hardware that is consistent, right? So if you have one keyboard with that layout and the other keyboard with this layout, it's just harder. But that's more a personal preference. I use this one with the US.
Have you tried blind typing?
Yes. Good point. That is actually the best way. If you don't use the 10-finger system, if you don't know, blindly how to type 6 and 7 without looking, get yourself a keyboard without a description. That's the best way. Then you will very quickly learn how to type all the keys without looking. Actually, it doesn't even make sense to look at your keyboard because your hands are in front of it. You don't even see the keys, right? So try to get the 10-finger system, I think it's called, blind typing or whatever, in order to type faster.
Okay, and also I heard that,
Sorry, I did not hear that.
blind typing.
Yeah.
It's not convenient to use European one.
I agree. I mean, but it's a personal preference.
You pointed out. Okay.
Another thing when it comes to context switches, that's another interesting topic, Vim way of typing. So you probably heard of this sophisticated editor. A lot of people love, hate. I use Vim a lot, but I don't really care about the editor itself. It's more about the concept it applies. It is, I believe, based on two concepts. One is, well, eliminate context switches, eliminate hand movements, so your hands are supposed to stay the whole time where they're supposed to stay, which is the home row, that is F and J for both of your index fingers, and don't move them away. Don't move them to the cursors or to escape or somewhere else, or even to the mouse, God forbid. They should stay here. And how that works is, well, if you type, and that is the reason why a lot of people are confused with Vim, if you start it, it's not, you cannot type right away. It's in what is called normal mode, and in order to type, you have to type a special key, and then you can type. And if you hit escape, that you actually should remap. That's another tip. I use it to remap to caps lock. So, because escape over there is too far away and you have to type it often, or in some MacBooks, you don't even have an escape key anymore. So you can remap that to caps lock, for example. And in that normal mode, you basically move around by using the same keys, because then they're overloaded. So, for example, you use H, J, K, and L to, up and down, left and right. And that is just easier because you get rid of the context switch of moving your hands down there to the cursors to do the same thing. And the same is true for, well, that's the second principle that is built on. It's composable commands, which make you to use text editing really, really fast. And once you get used to it, it's crazy. So it means if you have movement commands like, one word backward, one word forward, or left, right, you can combine it with an action. So you can compose commands to movement plus action. So for example, when you say one word forward and then you say delete one word forward, you can delete a word, right? Or substitute a word backwards and then repeat that action again and things like that. So you basically compose commands, and at some point, once you get used to these special keys like D for delete, W for word forward, then you can get really, really fast at editing your text. And this is actually how I got into this Vim world. At first, I watched a colleague who was typing on this Vim editor, and we were chatting about some random stuff, and I watched him typing while he was explaining other things, and it looked like magic. His cursor was jumping up and down in the editor, and it was just crazy to see that. And this was for me the reason why I wanted to look into this Vim thing, and it turned out to be the biggest typing productivity improvement in my whole career, I would say. Once you are in this world, it's just so fast to use it because you get rid of all of these hand context switches. By the way, that's also the reason why I use this weird line numbering. So the reason this is now a relative line numbering, The reason for that is if I say, okay, I want to jump, for example, to this line, then it's easy, it's relative 4 lines. So I say 4 lines up and then I'm there, right? Or for example, delete 3 lines down and then, well, now you don't see it. Then I delete exactly these lines with the relative line numbering where I want to jump to. So it's even faster to, you know, do some movements there. And there are tons of Vim tutorials out there that explain much better than I could how to use this. But in general, it's just these principles, again, of the, you know, removing the context switches. And I showed how to do that in a browser as well. And at some point, you know, once you get used to it, it took me like 2 weeks. At the first time, it's like horrible. You think, you know, because of this normal command, you think you cannot type anymore. Don't do that in front of a coworker. They think, you know, you're retarded. But once you get used to it, it's really, really effective to use. And then you want to Vimify your whole environment. So even my command line, I have a Vim movement. It's just much faster to say, okay, I want this command, that command, and then I want to jump back and replace something like that, right? It's so much faster to use rather than backspace, 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 you know, enter, enter, space, space, right? You can just move around much, much faster. And that is why I think it makes sense to look into that. All right. Another thing when it comes to context switches, I'm a big fan of what I call blinders of that concept. Why? You want to focus on one specific thing, one task at a hand, and you want to basically blind out, you want to remove all of the other distraction, everything else, right? That is the reason why actually my environment looks like this. So this is not a presentation mode. This is my normal environment, right? You see a tiny little taskbar down there, or you can have a full screen mode, and that's it. Same for my IDE. That's not a special presentation mode. That's normal. Because I want to have everything that I want to see right here, full screen, and remove everything else. Because, well, I want to focus on programming, for example. And that means that you even want to manage all kinds of distractions and be able to focus. First of all, that is not a joke. I actually purchased one of these ear protection, or what they called, or even earplugs are really good, or noise-canceling headphones. Why? Well, there's a lot of distraction from the world, and it depends, you know, what you are typically being distracted, or what you as a human can get easily distracted to. So I'm easily distracted by noise. So if something is running around or even calling my name, I'm totally distracted by that. So it helps me a lot to literally have, earplugs, and then the world is silent. That's great. There's also the concept of visual noise. If you sit somewhere and then people are running around, this might be helpful for some, and sometimes you might get distracted on that. So this is a thing, and it requires mental energy, and it will distract you if you have some deep, complex thinking work going on. So that is very important. Another distraction, worst invention ever when it comes to productivity, is your phone, because some phone was binging before, right? Bing or a Slack message and all these type of distractions. Because even if it's not important, even if that is just an unimportant email, this already requires some mental energy. This already distracts you from what you actually want to work on. So you should manage the distractions. That means close email, close Facebook, close Slack, put your phone ideally on silent and put it away, and then it's silent, right? And if you tell me, well, I have to react to these super important emails, no, you don't. You have to focus and get your work done. And in every job, it should be fine to say, okay, I will close my email, and I will look at it in 30 minutes. And I set myself a timer or whatever for 30 minutes, or an hour, even better. And then I will react to and respond to these super important emails. And it depends where you work. So I work remotely, so for me it's easy to say. But even if you work in a team, if your manager sends you important emails, then it should be fine to tell them, hey, I will react to that. But it might take up to 30 minutes, if that is okay, because I actually want to get some work done. And that should be a thing. There is a super helpful feature on every phone. It's called flight mode. That is actually the default state of my phone. Not right now because I have to use tethering. It's great because it just kills all of these notifications, which you should not need right now anyway. And another thing is where you put your phone. Actually, if it's right here, it will distract you. Even if it's laying like this, it will distract you. There is some science that said even if your phone is there, you will be able to focus less, even if it's turned off. So just the fact that it's laying there requires some mental energy because, yeah, you could get some message, right? Put it away. Flight modes, put it into your backpack or somewhere else. You want to focus. That makes a huge difference because you should do some deep thinking type of work. I have a nice comic here. I don't know whether you can read it. We have our developer dude who works on some super complex decision tree problem here. Oh, and what if I do this over there? And then, of course, some coworker comes in and says, hey, do you have 1 second? And what happens? Poof. Everything in your temporary memory storage is gone and you're lost in space, right? Because this is where you build up all some temporary storage in your brain and think about some solution, and then some distraction comes in and you're like, where was I, what? And of course the other person says, oh, never mind, it was actually not that important. And still you're lost in space, and this is how bugs happen. Because then you thought of some solution, you thought of some corner case, distracted, and you're like, oh, where was I? Oh yeah, let's continue again, and then you forgot, of course, this tiny side problem, right? That's an important thing. Working environments is another important topic. This picture was taken in Japan. I co-organize a Java unconference there at it's a long story, at a nice hot spring somewhere in the nature, which pretty much sounds like vacation, and well, it's a nice place to be. Definitely such a place like a conference or an unconference at a nice quiet nature setting is actually much more efficient and productive than you would think, right? Even if you spend like half a day, 4 hours at such a place, these 4 hours are much more productive and effective than 8 hours in a noisy office. It does make a difference as human beings what your environment is, how quiet it is, how noisy, how well you can work in it, or whether your mind can just relax. And then you will be much more productive because you're relaxed. It does make a difference. So I don't know whether working remotely is a thing for you or not, but that should be an important topic. Why? Because we have to do some deep thinking, some focused type of work as developers. Yeah?
You might have both outdoors for 4 hours or working outdoors for 4 hours?
It's not necessarily outdoors. I would love to do outdoors, but it's usually distracting my screen, right, if I sit in the sun. So sometimes I try to do that. It's not about outdoors or not. It's about being in an environment where you are relaxed, whatever that means for you, right? If it's a nice environment where I can hear, I don't know, nature or the ocean in the background, stuff like that, and that is typically for humans more relaxing than some noise or some traffic, stuff like that. It really depends what environment you prefer or what relaxes you. So next principle, every once in a while you should take a step back and reflect what you're doing. Ask yourself, what am I doing the whole day? Or how am I performing my tasks, right? So this is very well connected to the automation principle, what you showed before. So if you have a look at what do I spend my time with, and maybe there's an easier or a better or more automated way around to do that, right? So what do you do at the first thing in the morning? I don't know, I open up my IDE, my browser with always the 3 same websites and things like that, so automate it. You can write some, I don't know, script to set that up, or some shortcuts at least, and you do this, and you take your coffee while that is loading. Automation, right? Reflecting. Same with all the shortcuts, and to see, well, is there a better way around how I do work? All of that is, of course, long-term investment, so think of it like that, right? Shortcuts that you learn, automation that you write, of course, testing in an automated way, same long-term, right? Because you get rid of most of it manual tasks or some kind of tooling that you invest. So it does make sense. Principle 4, that's a nice one. Principle of don't make me think, or at least don't make me think twice. So once you find yourself in that déjà vu moment where you say, oh, I've been there, I solved this problem before, right? How do we, I don't know, deploy to our test environment? I don't know, I looked it up last week and I just can't remember, right? So I've done that before, I solved this problem before. So, principle of don't make me think, for example, you should have written some automation for it or some documentation for it at least, right? And in this case, even some automation is some form of documentation, right? If you solved a problem before, or if you thought of some complex thing before, then at least write some documentation, just for yourself. How did I solve this? That in the future you don't have to do it again. Or ideally, write some automation. How, again, do I deploy to my test environment? Well, it's right there. You wrote some automation script. So you don't even have to document it because it is right there how you do it. These are the steps. And that helps. Another thing of don't make me think, keep a to-do list. No, really, yes, I mean it. Thanks, Captain Obvious. But I don't know how many you do keep to-do lists, and there are tons and millions of to-do list applications out there. I kid you not, I wrote at least 3 during my career myself, Hello World to-do list app. I still wrote one that I still use, but that's a different story. But whatever to-do list you write, here a few recommendations I have for, writing to-do lists. Why? First of all, I always had some kind of to-do list where I had some hundreds of things in there, right? Of all the things I haven't done yet, and once you open it up, you're immediately overwhelmed, right? It's one of these context switch things. You look at, oh, still I have to contact that person, and I have to do that, and I still haven't done yet, and you want to close it again. You don't even want to look at it. It's just too overwhelming. So what helps is having to-do list for, a day, or maybe for a week, or even a month, or a sprint cycle, or whatever you have, but not bigger. So it's, limited. And then you can write, well, what are the things that I need to do tomorrow? So for example, if I want to have another shortcut, if you saw that, a to-do list for today, what are the things that I want to do today? So this is the AskAdoc format, for example. Do this, do that, do something else. So just write these. Can be super simple as a text file. It's not about the technology, it's more about the process that you use. Write that for the next day, sort it by priority. So start with the first thing, right, at the next day. And also, next thing, keep a done list, right? So once you write this, then you put it down there. Once you've done that, you put it down there. Then you cross out what you've done in that day. You can save it, and if then, at the next day you wonder what you've done, well, it's right there. Or if a manager comes and says, oh, actually, what did you do in this month? Then you can just, cat all of these files and say, I've done this, right? So that is very helpful and super simple. So at the end of the day, you can think of, okay, what should I do tomorrow? Most important things, and then in the day you can just start and you know what to do. Another thing that's very helpful, at least for me, when it comes to to-do list, I don't know if you know this feeling. I'm working on some code right now, right? And then out of nowhere, out of the blue, there comes a thought like, oh, by the way, I have to remember this, right? Now, this is the point. I believe the human brain, it's not a storage unit, it's a processing unit. So you should not require the mental energy to say, okay, I must not forget this and I remember whatever thought I just had. No, you should write it down somewhere, right? Now, if you go and open up your to-do list, then you immediately, whether you like it or not, you're immediately distracted, right? Because you read these hundreds of things that you have not done yet, and then you're like, oh yeah, and this person, oh, and then you're totally distracted because you actually want to work on some code, right? But then again, automation can help you. If, for example, you write a script to say, oh, do this super important thing, and then you hit enter, and then it's gone, and it's appended to the to-do list at the very bottom, and at the end of the day, I will look at it, but now I just want, some thing to write in where it's dropped in, and it's gone, it's out of my mind, and I can relax. Peace of mind. I know it's there later on, and I'm not distracted by looking into, a huge to-do list. So just a few experiences how to make to-do lists a little bit more effective, what helped me. And again, you can do this in shell scripts, you can whatever, what you want to use, but it makes sense to use these concepts. The next principle of knowing your craft, basically know what you're doing, because, well, it will make you more productive to actually know how your technology works, as stupid as this sounds. So, for example, go and read the documentation. No, really, I mean it. I can't tell you how many times I try to trial and error some problem and, oh, what happens if I do this? No, it doesn't work. Okay, let's try this. And then finally, after 2 hours, I'm like, okay, I give up. I will open up the documentation and have a look. And then after 10 or 15 minutes of reading, I'm like, of course it cannot work because, I don't know, I used the concept in a totally different way. And it just will make you so much more productive to properly read and learn it, and then you know what you're doing, and then you can solve a problem like this, right? Computers are very hard. If you make a mistake, you can do a handstand, you can do a backflip. It doesn't care if you make the mistake. If you forgot that semicolon, it will not just work. So you have to know what you're doing, right? And especially open source documentation, I believe, gets better and better. It explains the concept, how things work. Like Kubernetes is a good example, I believe. So if you read it, you will be more effective to actually use it and to know what you're doing. And connected to that, the principle of communicating. If you have some knowledge, if you know how to do things, try to communicate it and share it with your coworkers, your friends, your community. It will make you more productive and effective. Why? Well, it requires you to communicate and to teach, and that is actually the best way of learning. So write some documentation. No, really, I mean it. Documentation, I believe, is like testing. We like to have it, right? But nobody likes to do it. But it helps you a lot. First of all, teaching in all kinds of ways requires you to get more knowledgeable. Because if you're like, oh, now I roughly know how to do this, and I want to write some documentation, and wait a second, how do I write it? And then you double check and triple check how it actually works, because if you write it down, you want to be sure that is correct, right? And you don't have to do it out of altruism, out of being a nice person for your coworkers. No, you can do it yourself. So there's the saying of, if you look at code that you wrote yourself that is half a year old, it looks to you like code that somebody else wrote. I think that's not true. I think that's the case even after 2 weeks. If I look at old code, I have no clue what I'm doing or why, right? So go ahead and document even for yourself. If you have some thought, why am I doing this right now? Then write that down. Don't document the what, right? Like this returns a value, return value. Yeah, I see what it does, thanks. No, return why you do it in this way. And this will help you a lot. It's actually why I started blogging at the first time. So if the website loads, my blog on my website was actually just for myself to say, okay, today I learned about this feature, how to do that. So I wrote a blog entry, just as if I would write it for my past self. Hey, by the way, this is how you use that feature. And by the way, more times than I would like to admit, I actually Googled years later for some problem like, how do you do this? And I actually ended up on my own blog post that was actually the solution. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing, or I don't remember. But again, it helps you to write some documentation. And also to, again, share some knowledge. Can be in a documentation, can be you do an informal brown bag session at your company, can be to do a presentation or to attend a conference, or to write a blog post, to create a video, to create a tutorial, open source GitHub repo, whatever, because it will make you more knowledgeable. It actually helps you as much as you help the others, because you will be more knowledgeable, and then of course you will be more effective and productive of using whatever you're using. So in an overview, these are 6 of the 7 productivity principles. Wherever you find it, you should embrace and use some automation and try to focus and eliminate all the context switches, even the small ones that you're doing. That means using the keyboard whenever you can, favor over the mouse. Then every once in a while, take a step back and reflect and see, okay, what am I doing the whole day? If there's an easier way around. Principle of don't make me think twice, right? Write some automation, document, know your craft, and in the same way communicate, document what you know, and you will be more productive. Question?
I have a question to the second one.
Yep.
So, do you recommend to use some techniques like Pomodoro, some pauses, because you told me...
Yeah, Pomodoro, I was trying to do that. Pomodoro for me is a little bit too fixed. It says like 25 minutes or 30 minutes. Depends on whatever helps you. What I'm a big fan of is a timer. Why? Because with a timer you can actually relax and you set yourself some boundaries, right? So for example, if you say, hey, you have a meeting coming up in 1 hour, and if you have that thought in your mind, it will distract you, because you write checking the watch, is it already time? No, it's not. And 5 minutes later, is it already time, right? You always have this background thread going on of checking whether it's time for your meeting. If you set yourself a timer, you can actually relax. You can just totally dive into your code, because that timer will wake you up, alarm clock, right, when it's time for your meeting. So that helps a lot.
So you work during few hours without any pauses?
Sometimes, yes. Like if I start the day, sometimes even 1 or 2 hours, and setting the timer for later, because in the start of the day you can work for, I don't know, 1.5 hours or more without being disrupted. It really depends on the, or sometimes I work a lot at airports because I travel a lot, and then, set a timer before your flight, and that you relax a lot rather than checking, the board the whole time. And then the 7th of the 7 productivity principle, which is a little bit counterproductive at first, use the save time to relax, right? Because you will, doing that, save a lot of time by, automation and things like that. And the point is not to use the save time to write even more automation, to be more productive and learn more shortcuts, because this will not end well, right? And it actually helps a lot, as I said before, to have this relaxed state of mind, in order to be able to focus on a thing that you want to be able to focus on. And it helps a lot to have a relaxed way. So don't work too much, don't overwork. Even 8 hours of total focus probably won't work. This is, I believe, already too much. Work smart instead. And especially as developers, it's even very important to care about proper nutrition, like healthy food, healthy diets in general, doing sports, and enough sleep. I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much for your attention.